well, as well as think about how do we look at evaluation of project-based learning in a way that, and again, this goes back to some of my experiences early on with, okay, how do I know who is doing what in the group? Who, how are students being held accountable? Was one student doing the majority of the work, et cetera? And so looking at different points of evaluation throughout the project that may be helpful in terms of getting a bigger picture of what each student as well as what the team is accomplishing. So that being said, as I mentioned, LAR 303, here at Doane, we have a 3-course series liberal arts seminars. There'll be 101 in their first year, 202. 101 is that introduction to college and will be thematic. LAR 202 is a course that deals with democracy and diversity. And students then engage, learn about, discuss a particular problem that faculty member has decided that revolves around, or a topic that revolves around democracy and diversity. Our third year course, taken as a junior or senior, the idea is then students are partially responsible for leading the course. And that is engaging with a problem that is sustained throughout the semester, or a research question. And so what we're trying to achieve in that is to include collaboration, teamwork, and in a way that students are able to be engaged and actually lead part of the class. So it's also supposed to be an interdisciplinary course, which I'll talk a little bit about my experiences, which is exciting but yet daunting, and that it often ties in, it requires an experiential learning. So there has to be some component there. So really, when we talk about this course, it needs to have teamwork, it needs to address some question, topic, problem throughout the semester in a sustained way, and then student-led or engaged there. Continuing on then, just looking at the outcomes for this tied with, an understanding of that problem, able to do quote unquote research. And I'll explain what research may look like in this case, looking at ways to problem solve that. And then also, create a strong teamwork environment, as well as then tying in, okay, how do we understand our ethical values, our voices, our roles in a society. And so that ties on, it builds upon that democracy and diversity component, where then, okay, let's take what we've discussed and now put it into action. And again, if there's any questions, feel free to jump in. So this, when we look at the outcomes, the outcomes for this course tie back to the AAC&U's essential learning outcomes. And so if you're familiar with those, you may recognize 2 of the outcomes are, building connections of knowledge across disciplines, and at the same time to adapt the liberal education to serve and lead at all levels of citizenship. And so then within those, we're looking at, okay, what are these foundational areas of knowledge? How do they dovetail with their specialized studies? When we look at, how do they imagine these connections or knowledge? How do we apply the knowledge? And then at the same time too, thinking about the question of citizenship, how do we understand and have a refined empathetic understanding of a diverse world, as well as thinking about our ethical compasses. And so 303 again speaks to this course or these larger essential learning outcomes that our institution has implemented, many of which are based on the AAC&U's outcomes. So the course I teach, now with that little bit of context, and I will mention this too. So my hope is that you potentially can think along with me in this and think, okay, what's a course I might include experiential learning and project-based learning? And what might I do in the future, but at the same time too, what might I do differently if I've already done something like that? Or maybe I'm doing what I need to be doing, and that's fine too. So the course I teach, and a little bit about my background is, so I am I have a PhD in Latin American literatures and cultures. Part of my interests are critical theory, and so I'm very interested in narrative, both largely post-structuralist, post-modernist understandings of the world. So let's see how narratives inform our realities. And so the course that I created is called Rethinking Borders. And we traditionally, when we hear of a border, we think of a geographical, a national border. But we can also think about borders in terms of many topics. And those could be borders between disciplines, thinking about, okay, what's the difference between math and physics? Thinking about the borders between the self and the environment, thinking about cultural and linguistic borders. And so we set up the course from this idea of borders just to try to incorporate that interdisciplinarity throughout the course. And so there is, for the first 2/3 of the semester, we're covering content related to the different types of borders, literal and figurative, that we address. And so what we do is scaffold that. And so you can see here, I have the image of the chair just to talk about the linguistics. The middle image is a picture of our university. And the way I set the problem is, about 10 years ago, we are known as the college on the hill. Literally, the elevation of the college is a little bit higher than where City Hall in the downtown area is. And so that has turned into a metaphor of, okay, how do we understand the university and access collaboration with the community? And so is there a border between that? And we use an op-ed that was written 10 years ago by a few high schoolers, talking a little bit about how they perceived a border between the institution and the community. That being said, then the question becomes, how can Doane students, faculty, staff work to address and potentially break down that border? And so that is the overall question of the course. So again, as I move forward, this is where, if you have a course in mind that you can think about experiential learning, I would welcome you. So, and that's where I mentioned that right here. So project-based learning, this is one of the things I find my most passion related to the experiential learning components of the class, but at the same time too, find that it is perhaps one of the more stressful classes that I teach, given the extra component. You have the internal classroom experience, but then when it's external facing and you have deliverables, that also just adds to it. So typically with these courses, and I should mention a little bit about Crete, just so you know where I'm coming from. Crete is a community of about 8,000 people. About 35% of the community is Spanish speaking. We have a large population of newcomers, so it's exciting to be able to work. We have a thriving, so in a town of 8,000, we have a thriving adult education program that's actually run through the Crete Public Schools, and so we have almost 250 adults who are taking EL classes, GED, working on adult basic education, adult secondary education. And so from that aspect, that gives a little bit about the community in terms of our population. There's a large meatpacking plant outside of town. That's one of the large employers, the Crete Public Schools, the university, and then we also have a Nestle plant there. And so there's many nonprofit and governmental organizations within the town that are working together, and there's just many opportunities for dialogue and collaboration. And so that being said, so when I teach an LAR 303 course, it's one of those where I try to think before that course, what are some possible project ideas? And so looking at that aspect, I cultivated relationships over the years of, okay, who could I work with? And anytime that something comes up that I hear in the community, I have a Google Doc where I'm running to see, okay, what do I need to be doing? And so that pre-project task, and I'm just realizing they're out of order. I should have pre-project tasks in the left-hand side, but it's that identifying partners aspect that is going to be important. And so I'm working, continually to see, okay, what am I hearing in the community? What am I hearing on campus that might be a potential project? And so from my role then too is gathering that information relating to those potential collaborations and projects. And that even sometimes before the class starts, I may meet with community members or key individuals who are working with nonprofits or organizations to say, hey, heard about this idea, or I heard about this need, or I have this idea. What do you think about a sustained collaboration with one of my classes? And so I'm doing a little bit of the pre-work with the hope that it pays off in the end. And so when we look at that at the same time too, that's before the semester, which potentially goes early into the semester. Then students at that time are going to be reviewing the effective teamwork practices, and that's where scaffolding this information is going to be important. And I'll show examples of what I do and talk a little bit as well about that. And then just learning about project management. That is something that I had to learn in myself. Again, the WPI project-based learning institute really helped with that. But looking at those before that project happens, just thinking about, okay, how do I scaffold this? What options do we have? Maybe students have options as well, but then also reviewing, okay, and in many cases, what's during this experience too is you will find opportunities to, okay, how do you write a professional email? How do we work on when do you CC someone on an email? When do you BCC? We talk about all those things. So in that pre-project task, a lot of that conversation is happening there. During the project task, then we are meeting with our partners. So the idea is then we meet with partners that we've identified and come up with possible project ideas. That is perhaps, and I'll speak to this in a little bit, this perhaps is probably the most stressful part, to see, okay, where are the needs? Where's the student interest? And what can we feasibly do in a semester? And so at that point, then we meet, set up the projects, and students then begin to start operationalizing, the teamwork practices. The post-project then includes reflection on the project and course outcomes, and then also there's an evaluative component, which I'll review what I use in my classes here. So this now gets it more, that's more of the overview. This gets it a little bit into the deliverables and the evaluation. So in this course, I chunk it down into about the final project, which is a sustained project of about 30% of the class. Other components of the class include, they're again in that idea of teamwork and engagement. Students are tasked for teaching some of the classes and working on that. But the final project itself is worth 30%. And it's broken down into 4 components. And that is a self-evaluation, a peer evaluation, the professor evaluation, and project reflection. This speaks a little bit to some of the angst that I have with project-based learning and experiential learning, because I still want students to succeed even when the project ends up not working. And I will give the example of, we had a case 5 years ago, there was going to be a community garden project. Students had planned everything. We received days of rain that ended up flooding. The river near us overflowed and flooded the community garden, making the community garden unavailable for the rest of the semester. So we quickly had to pivot. At the same time, even though that project ended up, if you look at it from that aspect, failing, it was beyond our control. And yet at the same time too, I felt I had enough enough documentation to see, okay, this actually, I feel comfortable evaluating this, even though we never got to the specific day of the event. So when we look at the project tasks, I'm going to cover here, looking at a feasibility study and selection, the project roles. So when you're thinking about project-based learning, what is its feasibility? What are the roles that entail? We work on writing job descriptions. And so what are those roles? We also look at a team charter, as well as developing a task schedule. And then there's that wrap-up component. So I'm going to go through and just, again, and I apologize, I know I'm speaking a lot here. So if anyone wants to interject, I would welcome those interjections. But when we look at these components, this is what I have found to be very helpful within delivering that project-based learning. So on the day of the feasibility, or of the project selection and discussion, we first talk about, is this project feasible? Working with our partners, having met, looking at the scope, can we realistically, knowing that students are taking 5 classes, have extracurriculars, co-curriculars, can we complete this study? Is it or this project? And so what we do is just discuss, which ones, and as a class, we come in and rank which ones seem most realistic in a semester. Typically, that comes down to 3 events. So learning from again, the Project-Based Learning Institute in Massachusetts, typical group size should be about 6. So thinking of a class of about 18, 3 groups, 3 events, potentially 3 projects, however you want to look at it. But looking at, okay, what is the objective of the project or event? What would it potentially, or when would it potentially occur? Thinking about, is it a particular day? Is it a deliverable? What would it look like? What type of planning needs to happen? And then what resources or supplies would be needed? So thinking again too, are there financial obstacles that potentially make this project not realistic within the scope of the course? Who's our target audience in terms of what is the need we're addressing? One of the things is important to talk to students of, students may be excited about a project or an idea, but at the same time too, the idea is, what a need are we addressing in the community? And so that's a question that we always come back to during this process. We also talk about the types of positions, who is needed, what are their roles, and then again too, what would the event or activity look like on the day of that event, for example. And so these on one day, maybe 2 classes, we go through this, we use the board, we discuss the feasibility, and then we come down to, okay, rank the projects that you would like to work on. And sometimes this means that students are discussing, oh, well, I would really like to be on this project because I am a graphic design major and there's going to be some marketing components here that would be really helpful for me. And so when looking at that, trying to take into account, okay, I'm shooting for about 6 people on a project, but at the same time too, want to honor their wishes in terms of what project they might want to work on. And so that's just from that project feasibility study and selection. Again, if any questions, feel free to jump in. The next part then would be the project roles, and these tie to what positions are needed for planning, organizing, and carrying out the events. Again, too, we think about it from that project management, project design. Okay, if we are doing X project, we would need potentially these individuals. What I try to stress to them is that we do need a project manager, and that person is responsible, or co-managers occasionally are responsible for then moving us along through the project and making sure we hit the deliverables, making sure we are on time, all the communication, etc. And so thinking about that, once we have those roles more or less defined, we then move into, okay, how many people should be in those roles, who would want to be in those roles, and from that we move into job descriptions. And so we have students, and again, the first time I taught this course, it was hard for me to let go of, but I'm not covering content, but I'm not covering, traditionally thinking as a Spanish professor that, oh, I'm supposed to be teaching language in the classroom and potentially, oh, the soft skills or this other information that, or content that may be helpful in their career, but does it directly tie to my course outcomes? This is where I had to just be comfortable with myself of moving on and say, no, it is important, and we need to embed these outcomes within the course. And the nice part about LAR 303 is that this course has those outcomes. I've incorporated these practices into my Spanish classes when we have project-based learning or experiential learning. And one of the trade-offs is, okay, sometimes they have to produce a lot of information. It could be a Spanish 200 level course. And so while everything else in the class is in Spanish, I still may have them do the team charter in English or the task schedule in English, because I'm trying to hit these particular outcomes and making sure that they're hitting them, and at the same time too, recognizing in an ideal world, yes, it would be in the target language, and maybe in my 300 level courses I can do that, but I also want to know these outcomes are being addressed. And so,
Jared, you might get to this, but for when you're talking about the roles and the positions, do you assign those? Do the students assign those? What's the process of
yes, so
that?
that is, the idea is the students try to self-select those roles. There are occasions for the project manager. I do sometimes ask for a mini cover letter to say, hey, I want to be project manager, because that role is the most important. And I've seen it done very effectively. And I'll show one project where the project manager did an excellent job bringing everyone together. And then there's other times where, oh, okay, where are the meeting minutes from when you all met? It's like, oh, I need to write those still. And so it's one of those where I try again to honor what people would be interested in, but it is the project manager role that is the one that I would try. And at the same time too, that sometimes is the hardest one, because students don't necessarily see their strengths or interests within that role, which is fascinating. Like, oh, but my major is this, so I want to do this role. Well, but at the same time, too, trying to articulate and make the case to them, well, actually, project manager is a really great role because it allows you to practice effective communication, to manage various tasks at the same time. And so, yeah, no, that's and what happens then too is once they self-select, they have to write their own job description, and I'll show some examples here. But we then have a whole class on, okay, how do you write a job description? And we talk about the language, and again tying it in with the whole concept of linguistic and cultural borders, but more linguistic borders. When we talk about job ads, we don't necessarily see an ad saying, oh, be willing to work 50 hours a week. It's something like, oh, being willing to be flexible and have occasional evening hours and things like that. So we talk about, okay, imagine you're someone in HR having to write a job description, and you're keeping these things in mind, but you want people to apply. So how do you frame that? So it becomes then also part of the class overall, but at the same time, it still speaks to that skill of how do you write something in a marketing way, and talk about how a job description often, or a job ad can be seen within marketing. So we break up based on the interest in it. We break it up into groups of 2 or 3. I try sometimes. There's occasion where there may be one person in a role, but if there's more than one in a role, it can be helpful. Just depending on that accountability aspect, but then they have to write the 150 to 200 word job description. And so I'm going to show what those are, but I asked them to think about the position in its detail, the qualities of the ideal candidate, and think about the requirements and skills required. And again, I show them examples. We go through examples of job descriptions, that you can find online. But these are just 2 examples. One of the projects we had was, again, this adult education program through pre-public schools. We collaborated with some of the classes, some of the ELL classes, and had campus visits. And so the requirements you can see here, and these are coming from the students that I've taught: must be personable and outgoing, should be able to draw on personal experiences and relate with people of different background, should be knowledgeable about the Doane campus and opportunities that are being offered, be able to speak in front of an audience while always being respectful and aware of others' backgrounds. And then you can see there's responsibility there. I'll just highlight that one: making the visitors feel welcome at all times, as well as promoting the overall mission and value of Doane.
Jared, we had a question in the chat, and I didn't want to get too far, and I think it has to do with your other one, your previous slide, but also just in general. And Giovanna, please unmute if I'm not representing accurately. But the question in the chat is, do you scaffold some of these skills in smaller projects before the final project, or is the final project started very early each term where students develop skills through the project?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that question. So typically I found my first time teaching this course, I didn't introduce this project until week 7 of the semester, so halfway through the semester. And it was to get through all this and do it justice, which I didn't. It was like, oh, I should have started in week 4. And so when I teach this course, I try to, and with other courses, I try to introduce the project in week 3 or 4. And so in that sense, it's one of those just trying to think about, okay, if I don't do this by week 7, it's not going to be an ideal. And what, again, that stress of I'm working with community members, partners, And I want this to be in a successful collaboration. And so typically we develop those skills. In the LER 303 class, I do have them teach a class beforehand. So they already have to work on the team, the teamwork skills. We spend more time talking about the communication in that aspect and what it means to be a collaborative team member. And we do some of the they have to do the peer evaluation that they'll do at the end of the semester. And so that's, I mean, to speak to that question, I think hopefully answering every that. But yes, that's if in my Spanish courses, I do try to scaffold it across courses where there might be a smaller project in a 200 level course, and then the 300 level course, and then the 400 level course might have a larger project. And I will talk about some of those examples
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know you're talking about the scaffolding, which is wonderful, but how do you link the outcomes to the project? Do you use a pathway? Do you use a rubric? How do you link them?
Yes. So, and there is, and again, with LAR 303, the nice part is that we have a collaboration rubric. And so there are some rubrics. There's an intellectual engagement rubric, and there is, and I realize I don't have them linked into this presentation, but then we have a collaboration rubric where we do the assessment then of based on based on these outcomes that I went over at the beginning. So yes, they are assessed at the end. In my Spanish courses, where it is one of those where I've gotten to the point, and I think if we had to reimagine a program, typically it's language based, but why not have outcomes that speak more to what we're trying to do in a gen ed curriculum core? And that's where a lot of these outcomes, a lot of the assessments we have are core assessments, but how do we be more intentional about incorporating those into our programs? And so one of the things is I'll have my course outcomes that are part of official program outcomes, but I will have listed, okay, at the same time, I am going to work on problem solving skills, communication, teamwork. And so I'll speak to that as part of the course, but it's not part of the official assessment of program or university assessment in that sense.
So you're mapping your outcomes to a project, right?
Yes.
Is that what you're doing? You're mapping it. Okay.
Yep. Yes. Sorry. Yes. I'm mapping. Yes. The outcomes. And so the communication, there will be, okay, how are they hitting communication? And I'll show that I have like when I get to the reflection part, I'll say, okay, this is what I'm looking for to try to be able to assess, the understanding of a multifaceted world, for example. Okay, so then, and thank you for the questions. The other one example, just going to give here, this was with a diaper drive. And so this one, looking at, someone wrote about a community outreach coordinator. And I highlighted some of those action verbs of recruiting participants, communicating, distributing, collecting information, knowing what supplies, touching base with participants as the event gets close, remind them, and then ask the organization for any other additional donations, as well as communicate with those advertising and marketing. So this role too, when I talked about project manager, this role was similar to that project manager. She was in charge of really coordinating the project and the components of the class or of that class project. Once we've defined the roles, we then move into the task schedule and team charter. I'm going to reference here, there's a wonderful book. Joanna Wolf has a book called Team Writing, A Guide to Working in Groups. And so you're going to see some information here. I'm incorporating not necessarily as a way to share out, but this is what I actually share with my students when we talk about. So I'm giving some of the examples of how I scaffold and discuss what does it mean. So when we talk about a task schedule, we look at, this idea of, okay, who's responsible for what? And at the same time too, we then define as a class, okay, this is the project manager. Again, we need to talk about, okay, who's going to be in charge of publicizing the task schedules, making that with the deadlines, responsibilities, sending the reminders, keeping the minutes, and mitigating disagreements or create meeting agendas. So that is really the project manager has all these roles. And we talk about this right as I'm rolling out the task schedule. And so the task schedule, I'll get to that in a minute and I'll show an example. I show them the example from Wolf's book, but then also I'll show an example of what they have to do. But we also talk about collaboration. What does collaboration look like? So Wolf talks about face-to-face, divided and layer. So we talk about face-to-face in terms of, okay, we have class time, a little bit of class time to work in these last, throughout the semester. That would be face-to-face, everyone's together working. Then we can look at it, okay, is there a part of the project that needs to be divided where student A will do section 1, student B will do section 2. So they each have a divide and conquer aspect to the project that could also have a face-to-face. And then there could even be a layered where student A has to do task 1 first, student B, then once they get task 1 can do task 2. And so it's a waterfall in that sense in terms of, and so looking at discussing what types of collaboration exist within a project. We go through that. And then we get into the task schedule. And so this is, I show again, these examples are coming out of Wolf's book, but we have the example of a task schedule. And so what students do, the project manager creates a Google Drive folder and they put in their task schedule, all their meeting minutes are going to be in there, their team charter, any document is in there that any team member has access to as well as myself. And so I can go in at any time and see, okay, how's the project coming along? And so that's where the meeting minutes, I can see, okay, who's present in the meeting, what are the topics covered, what are the decisions that need to be made, who's doing what, and when is the next meeting. Again, I've had varying success in terms of, but again, it comes down often to who's that project manager. This is an example from one of my classes. I just took out the names, but again, tying that to, you can see, okay, students were present here. They looked at translations. They talked about cash donations. What was unique about this project was this was about the time that Venmo appeared. And so we had a lot of success from the project because Venmo was such a novel thing that people are just Venmoing money to the project members, and then we're able to donate. I think it was about $2,000 to buy diapers. And so at the same time too, they had collection, who they would contact, where they would set up boxes, hang up posters. So that's just in terms of one of the examples that then students would have in that Google Drive folder. This would be an example of a task schedule. And so you can see here, what they do is list the status, the contribution value. So if it's out of 10, 10 being a heavy load, big lift, they would then put down, okay, so an email might be a 1 contribution. And so you can go in and look and say, and this is where I say to students, hey, I'm going to be evaluating you. So you really want your task schedule developed because I need to be able to see what you've done. And so students in the project-based learning or experiential learning will have this completed by the end of the project. And then the charter is something else, again, spending time. This, again, I share with the students. I'm not going to necessarily go over everything as it just being cognizant of time, because I'll show the examples here, but really it's, okay, what are the goals for the project? What are the measurable goals? What are personal goals? What is the individual level of commitment? And what happens when there's missed deadlines or disagreements? And so what has really been fascinating, and I show this example to the students is, and again, this comes from Wolf's text, in looking at, okay, what are we trying to achieve? What are we measuring? And then the personal goals, for example, improve management and teamwork skills. They'll list out the student names and then they'll talk about, so then I'll give an example, again, my students, and you may see similarities like, oh, okay, students followed this model, but here's the example. And this one was exciting because number 2, the project, they just wanted to have fun. And so they looked at their measurable goals and you can see, okay, they wanted to hit deadlines, they wanted good grades. Then you see their personal goals and this tied within language. This was in one of my Spanish classes. And then the individual commitment one is actually a really interesting one that I had not considered beforehand. And that looking at, okay, being transparent in terms of where students are at in the course and their feelings on the project. And so students oftentimes are pretty, well, this isn't my first priority. And so I'm okay with, I'll plan to put in, a great deal of effort, but I have other obligations that potentially I need to. So students are able to see where students are in terms of that individual commitment. And then from that, they list their concerns. And that's where, one, baseball practices. And that's thinking about, again, going back to the type of collaboration, is it layered, phase-to-phase, divided? That's where extracurriculars might impact some of those ways of collaboration. Conflict resolution, this one, in this case, if they discuss, they would flip a coin to decide the fate. This one, if a student, if there was a missed deadline, they get a gentle reminder. The students in this one built in, if a student still missed it, they would have to bring coffee to the rest of the group during the next class. And so they can, creative ways of dealing with some of those missed deadlines, and then, how to deal with unacceptable work. So each group will then make a team charter. They'll turn that into me. I will comment on it. But again, they have a document early on in the project of how they're going to operate. I go over again from Wolf, and just this is in terms of strategies for constructive teams. In the interest of time, I'm not going to necessarily go through everything there, but I think when we talk about disagreements, highlighting, okay, discussing how can you, address disagreements, consensus, majority rules, instructor decides. We talk a little bit about that. We also talk about that storming as part of the, if you think about norming, storming stages of group work, that there might be moments where there are disagreements, and that's part of the strong, or of a functional team in that sense. So this gets me to the last component of the evaluation part. And students then are asked to outline, describe what they did, and in where their strengths are, where their areas of growth or improvement are, and then also talk about, what they were proactive in. And at the end, they have to assign a score for themselves, 1 out of 10. What I found is students actually are pretty honest in what they give themselves in terms of their project score. And that project score often lines up with the peer evaluation. So with 6 people in a group, each student is then responsible for evaluating their other teammates. They submit this through Google Forms to me. I'm the only one that sees the specific data points. And then what I do is take an average. This part is, again, 15% of that overall grade of the final project. But here's what I ask for the peer evaluation in terms of, the member communicated in a prompt, communicative manner. Members collaborated well. The member was available or open to discuss preparations. Member pulled equal weight, contributed ideas, materials. And if they're in the number 6, if applicable on the day of event, members contributed to the execution of tasks. So the student evaluators, again, are kept anonymous. The average is taken, and that grade is then, and this also helps me as the professor to then get a larger picture of, okay, how did this team work? How did individual members work? And then finally, there's that professor evaluation where I'm looking at the task schedule, the meeting minutes, timeliness, communication with me, collegiality, willingness to collaborate. And so that all goes into my assessment, which is then 50% of the final project grade. And then finally, this is where I get to some of the assessment obligations that we have with the LAR 303. And we have the reflective, and so I have my course where I'm looking at my outcomes. How do we understand borders? So I'm looking at number 2. How do we address the borders in the project? We're able to transcend them. And then in terms of number 3, then speaks to a little bit of that aspect of, how do we understand this in our personal life, future experiences? I scaffold this a bit more in class to bring in the question of, ethical obligations as a citizen. Again, that ties to the 303 course. So some just examples I'll give right here, and I'm finishing up here in a few minutes and want to leave some time. With the examples, as I mentioned, we had an adult ELL class campus visit day. We had a city tour. I'll show an example here. Students were responsible, working with the Crete Chamber of Commerce, to create a driving tour that was narrated. And so they created the narration, they created the route. So they had to do all the research to talk a little bit about, okay, we are passing Smithfield. And for the final day, we actually did the tour. We rented some vans from the university, brought Crete Chamber of Commerce individuals and other individuals from the community, and they did the tour, and it was a lot of fun, actually. And so the other, we've done baby item and children books drives for a local early learning center. One of my Spanish classes, we did a cultural artifact and memory or oral history project where found community members who were willing to find an object that had cultural value and talk about that. And so this project was really exciting from the standpoint of we were able to implement all this. But at the same time, too, they had to go through the IRB process. So they learned all about the institutional review board, what's ethical, what's good practice. And so that one was helpful. And then we've had various translation projects, a recipe project, a diaper drive, or just some examples. And so I'm going to give highlight of the Crete Community World Cup. This was an event that ended up being probably more than we should have taken on. And on the day of the first event, the championship game was interrupted for a tornado that was 15 miles north of us. And as a faculty member, that was a little stressful. To be like, okay, we need to get off the field. And we had I think 13 teams from all over, from the community, but also Nebraska, that local businesses contributed $300. And so it was free for teams. The teams got a t-shirt as part of that $300, subtract the t-shirt amount, and that went into a Doane equity fund that was a fund to serve, that was housed at Doane, but administered by City Hall. And the idea was to address, any financial barriers to participating in activities in the community, whether, rec teams, things like that. And so the students organized a tournament, a 2-day tournament, at various sites around campus. This was the logo. A graphic design major made the logo, made the flyers, and even this logo has continued on in subsequent Community World Cups, but it's become a very effective fundraiser and a great way to bring the community together. And then this was that tour, and just seeing here as a map of Crete, and what they did was basically put the narrative in there. So that is all I have in terms of the content. What I would say in terms of project-based learning, the intentionality component, being intentional about project design and execution. Making space would be taking time to teach and reflect those skills and knowledge. Documentation, that's where trying to articulate to students the importance of meeting minutes, agendas, task schedule, and making space for that, and showing that it's part of that. And then connecting the outcome, content, and skills. So facilitating students' ability to make and reflect on connections between those three. And so with that, I look like about 10 minutes, which was what I was hoping for. If there's any questions, or I'd be interested too to know what you all are doing, or what, successes, what hiccups or challenges, or anything in the presentation that you are already incorporating or might incorporate. So that's where, I'd like to see if any questions. Oh, I see.
Will Dyer, would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question? Well, it was a question from Will Dyer.
Sorry, did you want me to come in on
Yes.
this or?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay.
Please do so.
Yeah, my question is about the term that you used, the borders term, because I've not encountered it before. Are you really talking about barriers that were encountered during the projects, or is it something different from that? I mean, do you use borders because it's a more neutral term?
Yes, no, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm, and you're helpful. That question's helpful for me so I use borders just as the conceptual understanding of, okay, what is a topic that can apply across various disciplines? And so I do, coming from Latin America cultural studies, or Latin American cultural studies, that's where I can talk about the question of immigration and how we understand national borders. At the same time, too, we can get in then to borders between disciplines, borders between languages in terms of, but the idea too, and as I mentioned, the community, and yes, the book that you just put in the chat in terms of Gloria Anzaldua's Borderlands Frontera is a text that really guides, and we read that actually at the end of the semester. After the projects are in, we read that portion of that.
Well, that's great. That makes a lot of sense because that, I mean, you're really actually using the concept of physical borders, and which makes a lot of sense in terms of language learning, and then also in a broader sense of the kinds of borders that are not physical but more mental or political or whatever. That's a very interesting concept. Thank you.
Yes, no, thank you. I think I saw, yeah, and the question, there was another question about, let's me scroll up here. Disagreements. That really I should embed that in the course, or in course, I mean, because that is something, that is something I really haven't, I mean, of all the team charters, I have only had 1 or 2 cases where someone's approached me like, okay, we're having a little bit of disagreement, can you come talk to us? But yet best practice would say that there should be disagreements during that storming part of teamwork. And so perhaps I personally should spend more time talking about conflict resolution or in conflict in the course. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, question. So you mentioned, soft skills, hard skills. How does your grading look at the end? How do you gather the assessments? I know you provided yourself as 50%, right? And you have you allocated 25%, 25%, and then 10%, and you were the 50%.
Mm-hmm.
So how does you, at the end of the semester, how do you grade that?
Yes, and that's I mean, and this is an opportunity for me to continue thinking about, and really what I should do is be, and I try, I mean, when I'm looking at my evaluation, I'm looking at the communication, but the pure evaluation, I think what I should do is build that out a little bit more, and speak to, whether it's a 4-point scale or and that's probably the way to do that. And similar with, we have the collaboration one that is the institutional rubric for the LAR 303 course. What I would need to do, I think, is be even more specific in terms of when I give a lot of summative feedback on this that addresses the evaluation statements, because again, the idea is a project can fail, but yet a student for me could still, receive an A because they demonstrated effective communication, constant communication, that they were able in their face-to-face meetings that I observed based on their peer evaluations too, that they were available and responded and things. And so to that aspect, the soft skills, I mean, the assessment standpoint, really that project then is speaking largely to these soft skills. Yet at the same time too, I don't know if I've framed that, and I think, thank you for your question, it's productive for me, because I don't know if I've framed it in that way of ultimately what you're being graded on are these outcomes related to soft skills and not so much whether or not your project quote unquote succeeded.
Yeah, and that's true, because I'm reminded of when I took group communication, right? A group of 6 people doing a project, and who's going to who's going to do the write-up, who's going to do everything. So, and there is going to be disagreements. There are going to be, who's going to be taking the lead, and so there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah. Thank you. And that's what when I first started doing project-based learning, I didn't give much thought to that whole framework that needs to be there to see the success and feel comfortable assessing it, because I often hear students like, oh, I don't like group work because 1 or 2 people will do all the work. And so this has been helpful just in terms of looking, okay, what can I include that makes me, one, feel better about the evaluation process, and two, actually speaks to those skills that I'm trying to cultivate and have students use.
Jared or Amanda, do you have anything?
Yes, I do. So, Jared, thank you very much. This is very, very thorough, excellent work. Very, very detailed. I'm just so impressed.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, it might have been a little too detailed, but I figured.
Oh, this is
through.
fascinating. Absolutely, that's exactly what we need. And as Enrique and others have already touched upon this, the issue of conflict or even when you look at the evaluation statements here, right? All these components of it, or the different goals, different things that students are supposed to be addressing in the process of solving problems require certain skills. Yet very often our grading systems are still focused on things such as, well, let's just say loosely understood accountability, right? Or compliance with the school rules.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Johnny, Thursday night came and went, you were late by 5, 10, 15 minutes, you're supposed to turn in your paper, and I have to be, fair to everyone. Here's 10% of your grade goes out the window.
Mm-hmm.
That specific function, while it heavily influences the grade issuance, has really nothing to do with what it is that students learn in terms of the content of the course, except unless we treat this submission of paper or a document on time as, let's say, part of some learning outcome that would have to do with professionalism or how students address daily challenges that we cope with all the time, right, in our daily lives as professionals. Would you be able to comment on this? How do you address those skills that, again, not necessarily have much to do with the course content, but allow you to observe that some students are in it and others are not, kind of a thing?
Yeah, so I appreciate that question. That's one thing. So last year we had a book club that we read, and this is part of our CEDL, Inclusive Teaching and Equity-Minded Practices in the College Classroom. And it talked about classroom participation, and how when we think about an inclusive learning environment, classroom participation can be problematic for those quieter students where they may be engaged, but they just may not be speaking up as much. So when you have a grade to that point of, I'll give the example of writing late or not, but in the case of participating more than others, what we piloted last fall was a professionalism rubric instead of a participation rubric. And so in that professionalism rubric, we looked at some of those things in terms of, okay, timeliness and punctuality. Can we look at it from a career readiness standpoint, building skills, soft skills, talking about those important aspects, and looking at, okay, how do we draw attention to these in a way of, okay, these are soft skills that we need to learn. So we have, a category, and there's a few of us using this, the category of punctuality, the question of, just willingness to engage in class. Are students taking notes? Are they participating? But are they demonstrating some form of engagement in the class? Are they being proactive? If they have a question, instead of hearing, well, I didn't know that in class, on the due date, is there a way to look at and say, oh, you did a great job following up with a clarification? And so some of us are trying this, okay, instead of doing participation, how do we take in this idea of professionalism and framing it that way as a career readiness standpoint? Yes, it's still within, it still does not solve that problem of you're giving grades that potentially affect, tardiness or late assignments that overall affect a grade. But it was helpful just to see it from that context of, okay, how do we make this productive, yet have the accountability component, and at the same time to address what, you know, their futures and what future employers may be counting on or wanting to see. So I don't know if I fully answered your question there, but
Absolutely. Absolutely, this is it. I think that again, I appreciate what Will wrote in the chat here: professionalism instead of participation. When you think about it and you talk to students in terms of course participation, please pay attention. It's very important. It's vital to your success. Blah 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 blah. These are the guidelines. But if you throw it back at students saying, "Okay, guys, listen, this reflects on you as a professional," it implies some sense of responsibility and really internalization of what it means to participate in the course, right? So I, as a human being, I suppose, I react to this quite differently, right? If someone tells me you shall do X, Y, and Z, or you shall not do X, Y, and Z, that's a rule for me to break or not. But when it comes to, hey, it reflects on you as a person who is responsible for their actions, well, yeah, that's quite a different approach altogether. Just kind of like, you know, different mindset, seemingly similar ideas, right? But it really it seems like this would really help us address this question of professionalism, meaning that it's an internally driven motivation to participate in course activities rather than this outside, you know, carrot on the stick kind of a thing.
Thank you. And being mindful of time.
Oh yes, absolutely. This been great. So again, thank you so much, Jared.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you all.
All right then. Thank you. Perfect. And we have the Eddie Lynn is here, our second presenter. So let me just introduce Eddie. We are so very excited to introduce Eddie Lynn, the visionary founder of NexusEdge. Eddie's career journey includes times at Goldman Sachs, UBS Investment Bank, Adobe, and Live Nation Ticketmaster, showcasing his versatility in finance to marketing and business development. An alumnus of the University of Texas at Austin with a degree in electrical engineering and an MBA from the University of Southern California, where he served as student body president. Eddie's multifaceted career also featured a memorable stint as a contestant on the reality TV show Fear Factor, out of all things. Today, Eddie will discuss how NexusEdge is revolutionizing education by integrating skill-based training developed in collaboration with leading companies such as Google, Citibank, and Apple directly into classroom settings. By aligning educational outcomes with employer needs, NexusEdge not only enhances student employability through digital credentialing and potential job interviews, but also significantly reduces faculty workload. Eddie will share insights on the profound impact of his initiatives, which is currently implemented in 60 California community colleges across a variety of disciplines. Mr. Eddie Lynn, thank you very much for joining us. Welcome.
Hey, thank you so much for the introduction. And something I wanted to mention as well was I was an instructor, adjunct faculty at Cypress College, and I wanted to share a little bit of the projects that we did there because my focus has always been on project-based learning for employability. Like everything, even if it has been just any coursework, it's always like a focus on how do we tie that to not just CTE education, but also how can a student get a job out of this. So I wanted to share a little bit, dug out some photos from my time as an adjunct at Cypress and at Skyline on what the students did in terms of what the projects were, what they got out of it, and then how do we scale all that with NexusEdge, and what are the results from that? So one of the big points I always like to come across before really building something that scales is, well, you get it right in one case, one instance, and then how do you replicate that? So let me share my screen. We'll go back through some really old photos from 2016. Look at that. What is this, if you wonder? So at Cypress College, if anybody's here from Cypress, you have to decorate the business window. Every faculty has to decorate the business window once per week. And that is basically this glass box where you decorate it. You and your students decorate however themed you want. We got it close to Halloween. So this is people just getting stuff Halloween. So I said, look, You guys use your creativity and let's just see what you put together. You know, based on the themes of what we do within this course, what I've been talking about in this course, what do you do? So they're putting together a money tree, which is apparently what that is. Maybe those too much emphasis on monetization within a business and marketing course. I thought that was interesting too. And they're all working on it together. Now they have like legs of various things. This is all from Cypress College's like supply cabinet. So they're all just pulling stuff here in the lobby. And ultimately they put, yep, money tree. They put all of this together. So really happy with what they did. This is their project as a class to decorate the business window. And they just put a bunch of dollar bills here and tried to sell the shirts that they made and then the jewelry that they created, which is actually part of a project that I actually assigned. So one of the things that this is a digital marketing course. So, feel free to jump in, ask questions anytime, especially if I miss anything. So the project was, hey, why don't you come up with something you want to market and then let's just see what happens, And so what happened is there's one team, they were really into soccer. So LA Football Club was not here at that time. Now they play SoFi Stadium, wherever they're doing now. And so that we want to market LA Football Club. So what they did was they created fake soccer balls and put on the logo of LA Football Club on them and started selling them online and using the digital marketing principles we talked about in class. They did very well doing that, and they eventually got a direct message on Twitter from like Mandalay Entertainment, which owns the Warriors, Dodgers, A's, and LA Football Club. And they got two things. One, a cease and desist from them. But the second was an invite to come into their office on Mandalay Entertainment and say, how do we partner with you to market LA Football Club to Gen Z? So you have a group of 4 students working on a class project. Now they come into Mandalay. I was looking for their pictures, but too many pictures over time. And what they did was Mandalay really edited their shirts. The students designed these themselves. And then they allowed them to sell them on their website. And so that was really fun to see a group of students be able to work with a multinational organization on promoting a professional sports team. Another group was really interesting. They wanted to sell jewelry online. So they built a website to do that as part of the course. And then what happened there was that they started sourcing jewelry from China for like $3. And then they saw Forever 21, if you guys are familiar with that, selling it for $25, the same jewelry. So they said, no, we're going to start selling this on our site and for half of that. So they started selling the same jewelry with their brand, everything, to London and other countries where people actually bought it. And Forever 21 took it off their site. They made a bunch off that, and they're able to see, digital marketing firsthand. So I mentioned this for a reason before I really dive into the tech that we built, because I wanted to illustrate that these projects in an individual classroom scale, students were able to take what was taught from a digital marketing perspective and use that into a particular project settings that were really helpful in them building out a career and having them as talking points in their interviews in the future. So, okay, then the question became, how do we scale that? So I'm going to guess like 70% of the folks here are at campuses that use Canvas, and especially all of our California community college folks right here. So the one place to really scale this, because all of our students, they have different responsibilities. Many of my students were working. They had other family responsibilities, so they can't go do extracurriculars. So how do we put projects within a classroom that have that same effect as that we had in Cypress? And then we can't expect, we have 2 million students within the system. We can't expect to do all the trainer stuff. That's just asking for a lot. So one of the big things here is, how do we make these projects from employers available within their course? How do we make employer curriculum be accessible to faculty and at the same time, benefit students from a job perspective? So, we have our NexusEdge app here that's installed within Canvas. So all you have to do right now is click on it and you will see employer instruction. You'll see right here that says, all right, these are all materials that we partnered with. So we partnered with Google, Apple, Citi, Snapchat, Shopify, and said, why don't you create content with us? And we will put it in a menu in a Canvas app, and faculty can add this to their course within a couple clicks. So it benefits a lot of people in a lot of ways. Industry, they can prepare students for their jobs quite easily at great scale. Faculty makes it easier to have materials from industry they can easily add within their course. Students can learn what the employers are looking for. And at the same time, they get digital credentials and projects they can show off as part of their portfolio. So here's an example. Let's just say I'm creating another weekly module within Canvas again for my students. And Snapchat has come up with some materials right here. You know, they have a bunch of materials on augmented reality because this is what they're looking for and their latest candidates. I don't know if you've seen the, you know, the type of lenses is what they call where you can put something on your face and you can take pictures of it. I see some questions out here. And then what you can do from there is that you can see some of the videos that Snapchat has put together.
Hi, my name is Jonathan. In this Lens Studio tutorial, we'll be going over the 3D body template. The 3D body. Here, you'll notice that our character is tracking object index 0. In other words, tracking the first thing detected. Below that, you can choose how your character tracks the body in the track.
So basically that says, okay, you know what, that fits within my course. Let's hit add, and then we'll choose week 2 and say this is worth 10 points. And we'll hit create draft. So what this does is it takes the materials that Snap wants faculty to teach and students to learn and add that within Canvas in the most convenient possible way. So that way, you know, any faculty in any class, and we've seen this in ESL, agriculture, urban farming, kinesiology, private pilot training, automotive, all pre-calculus, all different courses implement these materials because they're always a little CTE spin to all this stuff. So we've seen faculty statewide at 60 California community colleges add these materials. So faculty can still edit as they wish, and they just hit save and publish. And that way they have a module from Canvas automatically populated within their course. Faculty don't have to learn anything new in terms of a system. They don't have to download anything. You don't have to install an app. Students don't have to learn a new app, so you don't lose any students there. And students are answering quiz questions like they normally do, because if a student has to create an account, if they learn something new, they try to make excuses onto, you know, why didn't I complete my homework or something, this project. And what also, you know, when they complete the multiple choice questions, they get these quiz credentials that, you know, they can see, they show their portfolio, they add it to their LinkedIn profile again within a couple clicks. And then what happens is you'll see, this is one student right here that, you know, he posted his credentials that he earned about 3D game programming. And he was a really, really motivated student that we worked with him on a variety of programs. He was able to get into the Citigroup program. And from there now, he's an incoming risk management intern at Citigroup, which normally requires a 4-year degree. He got that, and he was able to transfer UCLA as well. And he started at De Anza College in the Bay Area. So we're really trying to break down those traditional barriers where employers used to say, oh, well, you have to have a 4-year degree to work in our different roles. Whereas we want to make it possible. We've shown that students now with, you know, 2-year degrees can get jobs at JP Morgan's investment banking division, Morgan Stanley, Deloitte, PwC, Snap, and many others. Because I felt when I was at Goldman Sachs that many of my students at Cypress could have been my colleagues in New York, and it just became a question of how do we prove that? So now more on the project element of all of this is that, let's go back to our modules. We saw that week 2, I populated 2 things automatically within a couple clicks. One of them is that multiple choice quiz, but the other one is the project. So what is this project and what did it lead to was the big question. So the project that Snap, we let the employer dictate the projects. We let Snap say, you know, we give them the freedom, say, what do you want the students to learn? We'll look over it, and are you good with this? So they said, we want the students to build a lens, like that dancing thing, the thing that goes on your face. We want them to do that. We want them to submit it and put it within our ecosystem and show it off to their peers. They can learn a lot from a business perspective from it too. And they did. They followed the instructions on how to use the Snap Lens Studio, which is the editor for all of that. And then they submit it here and they hit submit quiz and it shows up in Canvas. They can upload it automatically. And then this is what happened. We had a dancing Shrek show up from one of the California community college students, and he ended up receiving he was part of a summer program at Snap, and students people all over the world used his dancing Shrek in their like living rooms. It's quite easy to do also. There's, you know, in addition, it covers multiple areas. In addition to the art element of it, there's a great business component too. I created this as part of just learning this myself. And somehow this thing called Wombat Attack I created, if you're familiar with what a wombat is, Australian marsupial, got 467,000 views and uses all throughout the world. And I created it in 5 minutes. And then, well, that's interesting and all, but what do I learn from this? Well, these are the statistics from all of it too. And this is like Google Analytics, if you ever used it. It says, okay, you know, women prefer this in this particular age group. For some reason, this lens has been really popular in India where they don't have wombats. And I don't know how big of Snapchat users they are there, but these are the type of analytics that students can talk about on their resume, because there's a lot of digital marketing roles out there. They don't require a ton of experience. They just require the skills. And being able to talk about this, show this, just goes to say, hey, you know, I can help digital marketing at your companies. We did it with the most cutting edge technology, and we understand all the principles about conversion funnels and everything in the most realistic sense, probably better than the people hiring them. So that just makes them a more attractive candidate. So it's things like this that really let employers help come up with project titles. Students can complete it as part of their course. They have something to show companies. And here's another one. This came from, you know, Foothill De Anza. Their district also had, you know, a Unity program. So those who are familiar with Unity, it is the largest, most widely used game engine in the world. So I don't know if you guys have seen your kids play these kind of games. They've been around since, man, a long time ago, since I was in like middle school. And what these are is that you can explore this little maze and play a first-person shooter. And a student at De Anza created this in a couple weeks, I would say. So what's been really interesting is they can show these gaming studios and say, hey, it doesn't matter where I go to school. I put together this game and I did it in 2 weeks. Give me a chance. I learned Unity, the most widely used game engine in the world. I think like 60 or 70% of all iPhone apps are made using Unity. Nintendo uses Unity to build some of their games. Almost all VR applications are built using Unity. So this provides a wealth of job opportunities, yet allows the students freedom of creativity. So one of the biggest aspects we like to focus on when creating these projects is that we let the students dictate their own level of creativity, because everybody has different levels of background. Earlier in their career, they don't know as much as other folks out there. So it's really trying to say, you know, from what you know, what can you do that would add value to our business? So this is one from Citigroup. The students, like, she was like 18, I believe at this time, and she was an artist. And she had no idea there was a career out there called user experience, user interface design. I saw something she included in her portfolio. It was like a drawing of like a Pokemon or something. But what happened was, I was like, this is an actual career. So what happened was, as part of her project with City Ventures, you know, she created these designs right here. They created some machine learning elements too. And then those designs for those pages end up on City's actual website. So for those of you who've explored some of these City products, you would probably be surprised that it was implemented by 18-year-old at Foothill College. And what happens there is, you know, their design team really approved of it and thought it was great. Some really out there ideas that were also really interesting was they created something called City Coin. You leave it up to them, right? I noticed at that time period, students knew way more about these coins or the myth or hype of these coins than I did myself. And so they came up with their own ideas for City on how to capture a new business with digital currency. They created their own credit card, their own apps. You can see how they designed all this themselves. So I think from a project approach, one of the biggest things that we like from a philosophy perspective is that faculty just say, hey, this is your project, use your creativity, but then the employers kind of provide a little bit of guidance into what provides us our business value. And ultimately, when students have this, they become more employable. We've seen students that didn't get a particular job one summer, and then they just show them the game they put together, and then they get the job the following summer, and the employers tell them that's the reason. So there's a lot of other student projects I have out there, and I know I just talked a bunch, and there was a lot of stuff thrown in there that's probably unfamiliar for most folks. But now this is at 60 California community colleges, and hopefully the rest shortly. And yeah, any questions on that before I can even elaborate into other different areas?
So just sort of like logistical question, right? I suppose. How do we activate this? How do colleges have access to it, or are there institutions outside of the community college system that have access to this, or this is just for us?
Yes, so the only other institutions that we've implemented outside of the community college systems are some HBCUs. There's a few out there. Langston University uses this quite frequently throughout their courses. It's installed at Spelman College, Fisk University, and those are the HBCUs. High schools, there's a lot of high schools from a few districts that we work with right now that also do the exact same thing. And that makes sense because the high schools are the pipeline for our colleges. So it makes sense that they would do the same. And there's dual enrollment courses. So there's a lot of overlap there too. They're roughly the same age, really.
Mhm.
So, I think I don't like to distinguish too much between, let's say, high school and community college because, a 17-year-old in this building is not really that different when like he or she was in the other building. So there's a lot of high school in there too. But how to access it, the process typically has always started with there is a faculty that says, hey, I want to give this a shot at my college. I've heard about it from, I don't know, something, somebody, somehow. And then they request
Friday Hello Talk.
Huh? Yeah.
You heard it here.
Yeah, you heard it here.
Sure.
And that's usually how things get going. They make a request
Sure.
to their dean, IT team, and they say, I'd like this installed within my learning management system. In this case, it's Canvas. And then you'll see that this just shows up. And this is what's interesting is then you'll have a core group of faculty adopters who led this in the first place, and then they use it because it's just there. But what gets really interesting is the faculty that just see it here on the navigation bar, and they just click on it, just because people click on things. And they're like, oh, this is interesting. We could really help students go from zero to hired, building a professional brand. They just look at what works for them. Google, sending professional emails. And then they start adding these materials on their own. So it's a combination of a core group of faculty leading the charge and then seeing who else does stuff. And that's what's so fascinating is I would not have imagined that sending professional emails, the training module created by Google, would be the most utilized that we've seen in the state of California, with tens of thousands of students taking this, assigned from faculty in a huge variety of courses. And I was shocked. And then to me, the data says that, hey, we think that faculty believe that their students can't write emails or communicate. And I bet that probably resonates with a lot of folks on this call too, because I think increasingly as we get within this generation that, with how everyone has been communicating since as long as the students have been communicating, it's always been short form messaging, like text messages, short messages on social media. So when it comes time to send emails, there's a much greater gap than there's ever been. So this has been the most assigned, and this is the one that's reached the widest variety of courses, but that's usually how discovery happens.
Thank you, Eddie. I have a question. Can you provide an example of a learning outcome for one of these courses?
Yeah, so the immediate outcome for those courses is that they get those digital credentials that are right here, so that all students are at least getting something. So they're getting industry credentials in addition to their degree. And we want that so that there's a lot of synchronous action between what industry is really looking for, what they input, as well as what they're getting from their institution. Now, from there, a lot of these materials of the student, like if they pass those materials, they can opt in to have their materials sent to the company. So this is actually a dashboard that we created with Northrop Grumman, and we can log into this, and then Northrop Grumman sees a variety of different students out there into their, it kind of looks like this essentially, but like they can screen candidates based on who passed the credentials. And so if they like the candidates from there, they can interview the candidates. And what's interesting there is that reduces the friction between learning something in a classroom and getting a job, because then it doesn't go back to, I need to go to some company's website. I need to go, upload things that I don't have and take all this time that I don't have. It's their materials can go directly to that employer, an employer that is open to hiring them. It's not about who you know necessarily anymore. It's about, does their project show what they can do? So what's happened there is that students are able to get quickly routed to that company, and then they're able to receive those positions to work on those projects with the company. So those outcomes have happened with a number of companies at this point, and the outcomes where the students, they've gotten their jobs at, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Deloitte, PwC, Snap. It's either happened directly through us or we watched what they did afterwards, which has been interesting to see. Is we recently saw a student, he did the city program with us, but he'll be interning at the gaming company, Electronic Arts, this summer. So it's really been fun to see what they've done since graduation, as well as what we've been able to be directly responsible for. But in terms of outcomes, it's a combination of both credentials that lead to interviews and then hopefully jobs, depending on how they do on their interview.
So then those professional skills, from those students, are they integrated into your curriculum? Is that
So
what you're saying?
it's we leave it up to faculty, actually. So just think of it as kind of like a textbook, right? Because you see right here, let's say, back at Cypress, and this is my curriculum. I'm building out, let's say, week 4 of instruction right now for this course that I'm creating. And then I could either write curriculum through, doing what I normally do, which is adding pages within Canvas, adding a quiz, just creating it from scratch. Or instead of doing all that, we can add it to the curriculum. But it doesn't create an entire curriculum, because that is not a good thing. Because then you can't teach an entire course you didn't create. That's just not practical, doesn't work very well. It's where within your existing 12, 15 weeks of your course, does this particular module fit within your course? And sometimes an instructor could use 7, sometimes they use 1. But it's whatever they feel complements their instruction. The one thing that is standardized is that this material that is imported will be roughly completed by the average community college student in a week, so that you can reliably add something to a module and know that most of your students feel comfortable completing within a week.
Got you. But then also at the same time, like you mentioned, Google and other ones, they provide the objectives, right? Or what those professional skills they want from the students, right?
Well, we have to work on it with them together, and that's one of the things that we do as the NexusEdge team, and I've kind of queued this up as well, because a lot of the companies, they're not familiar with how things work in the classroom. They're not really familiar with learning management systems, best practices with learning management systems, so they say, well, we want to be a part of this. What can we do? And every employer usually has some kind of training materials, but they don't have a lot of training materials, and if they do, it's not built for the classroom. Most certainly, employer learning teams have not said, you know what, let's just figure out what fits within Canvas. So this is where we help them, is that for Snapchat, for example, we just opened a blank document, a Google Doc, as simple as it gets, and say, let's type this out together. So, I said, what do you have? And they said, we have a YouTube channel with over 1,000 videos from Snap. A lot of them are how to create those augmented reality lenses that you saw. And so I personally started writing a lot of these materials right here, using some of the videos that was important, like looking at the outcomes that they wanted. And then I started writing all the different quiz questions. And then that's when they started getting on the same document and saying, okay, well, they're going to edit this and say, hey, we like this part. Let's get rid of this. Let's comment on this. Why don't you change this to that? And it's things like that, is, getting that ball rolling is easier for them to edit a document than it is to start from scratch. And then from there, we have our own management system, content management system that populates all Canvas instances globally. So it starts with, what are your end goals to the company? Let's write a document together, and then we'll take it completely from there, and we put it in a content management system that will update all Canvas instances in real time.
And just one more question. In your student population, do they tend to have those professional skills? on, or you can have Johnny coming in with no experience whatsoever?
Yeah, most students have no experience whatsoever. I pulled up some of the resumes of the students that did end up those positions. One of them that you saw, his only prior work experience was he was working at Cole Haan in sales, like the shoe company. And then another one, I forget, I think he was just like a, what was he doing? Oh, he was a server at Nobu, actually. I did not even know that there were 116 dishes to memorize, but that's what his entire work experience was prior to going into Citigroup. They had some hobbies that kind of leaned a little bit that way too, their own personal projects they like to create to show interest in the field, but certainly their prior work experience, like being at Cole Haan and Nobu, that's more typical of a student, is not the thing that says, yeah, this is totally like someone who would work at a bank, because that doesn't make a lot of sense. So it's usually to take those without experience and to get them into positions that typically expect experience.
Thank you.
Eddie, from your perspective in terms of adoption, where do you find you mentioned already the professional emails, and it's hey, I'm not necessarily surprised, these days people write all kinds of emails, right? And especially when it comes to students who are perhaps more used to texting, and there's this instant messaging tools. I tell you, I'm just sometimes okay, how am I supposed to know where this message is coming from, right? There's no salutation, there's no name, there's no nothing, just one question, how do I log into the course?
Yeah.
So obviously this is of great demand. Aside from this, do you have a list of what's number 2, number 3, and which perhaps which courses find your the apps in Canvas most useful?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'd probably talk about the ones with the broadest appeal. So you bring up a great point too. I started tracking down, what were the issues in emails. I think a faculty told me that there was a student that wrote the entire email in the subject line, which I thought that was even surprised my wildest expectations of a poorly done email. But yeah, this is definitely number 1. But I would say the other is mostly centered around soft skills. I think those are being called durable skills now too. So you'll see some on, business communication. It doesn't really matter that it's called business communication. People treat it like communication. So these types of things, William Blair is an investment bank, but this is the slide deck they hand out on the first day of orientation. But it's not about investment banking. It's all about, relationships, meeting etiquette, professional growth. Some of the more interesting ones that I didn't connect the dots in was this EQ for entrepreneurs. I was like, this is created by, one of the largest accelerators for entrepreneurship in the world. And it's like for building companies. And then I saw in Pierce College, this was assigned in a class called anger management. I was like, I have to figure out what is going on here. So I asked the faculty, I was like, how does this make any sense? I'm sure it does, but I want to know. And then she told me that, one of the key aspects of anger management is empathy. And empathy is all built off of EQ. And she doesn't care if this is EQ for entrepreneurs or EQ for whoever. EQ is EQ. So teaching that within the context of anything, what was most useful. So EQ for entrepreneurs has been really valuable. For those more hard skills type areas, you'll see things like in digital marketing from Shopify, because they can get free stores, they can start companies off of this stuff. There's a lot of demand for digital marketing roles that don't require a lot of experience, and students can come from a variety of backgrounds teaching that. Another ones that have been super popular are all the ones from Google on docs, sheets, and slides. One of the big reasons is that I think it's good that you mentioned my weird diversity of courses in early parts of my career, because it didn't matter what industry I was in. It was entertainment, it was in financial services, if it was in tech, it was all the same. We all had to fill out like things related to Google Docs, spreadsheets, presentations, and I'm sure most folks out here, it's the same. is that these are foundational skills for the workplace. I'd probably be picking up a spreadsheet for something, even if it's a to-do list, grocery list. So these things get assigned a lot. So I would say the second most popular are all those Google, workspace materials on putting together spreadsheets, documents, formatting the documents, and how to put together presentations, formatting, things like that too. Those are big ones too. Rio Hondo contributed by adding a lot of their own career services credentials, and these have been really, really popular as well. Another probably universal aspect to all the students is learning more about career services.
This is really nice. Yes, we just heard from our previous speaker about the empathy, and conflict resolution and all these, what we sometimes are referred to as soft skills. So this is absolutely amazing that you're able to put this in an app. And you're right. I'm still really very much impressed with the universality of it. Right, that it has so many applications in pretty. I mean, to behave in civil manner, there isn't a chemistry course or philosophy course or PE course that wouldn't be interested in making sure that students adhere to certain guidelines, right? And again, those would be very well articulated here and could be assessed. And that would be my question. If when it comes to assessment or evaluation of students, what the skill and competency that students acquire as a result of interaction with these apps, what would that look like?
Yeah, so that's a really great question, because there are two aspects of it too. Is because if you want to operate something at scale, you can't have, not everybody will be able to grade, hundreds of projects all the time. So there are times the faculty get access to those two materials, assessments. One of them is a multiple choice quiz, roughly 20 to 30 multiple choice questions. And the other is an optional project specific to that topic. And so the multiple choice one is easy to get done because they don't have to grade. The grades go automatically into the grade book. And then the other optional one that gets into the weeds a little bit is, okay, this project, and they can be, really diverse. For example, the sending professional emails one, what was interesting there is that the topic was write an email to any company about anything you want. And it was so fun to see what they wrote. There was one student who was writing to McDonald's, theoretically, about how they should have the Big Mac available year round, and why it was such a strategic mistake to not have the McRib available year round instead of like a seasonal burger. So it was well written. And it was interesting to see what they were passionate about. I did not know that there was so much passion around the McRib, but it was really interesting to see that, okay, there's something that you can personally grade, which may take a little bit of time, but hey, who knows? Maybe AI is going to clean that up soon. Maybe AI can start grading these projects. I don't know. That's something we're looking into. And then the one that's already automatically graded, which is multiple choice. So two forms of assessments. One is richer than the other one. In fact, I really want to say this is that, completing the multiple choice will get you to the top 30%, but really what's gotten these students hired is the project, because the employers, they're going to be hiring, any employer is going to be hiring like a very select percentage of who comes into their hiring funnel. And so although the credentials get them, maybe in the top 30, 25% of the way, just showing that they have the grit, expertise to at least get the foundations, what really gets them hired is that project. So I can't emphasize that project enough. I think the next step in being able to scale the project is having AI grade these, because it's going to be really hard to grade, what is a good email? Like having that done 10,000 times is a lot harder than automatically grading a Canvas multiple choice quiz.
Gosh, are you ready to scale up to AI? What's up with that, right?
Yeah, this is like what I was just on that call that I just stepped out into another Zoom call with. It was at Cypress. It was the whole thing was about AI, actually. It's just, how do we incorporate AI into our courses? What does industry expect with an AI? And that's what's interesting too, is there's been a big push to everybody right now. So we won the Google Cloud Customer of the Year Award for diversity, equity, inclusion. So we were at Google Cloud Next last fall. They just had it again like last week. I don't even know how they keep up with this stuff. But what happens there is they have a showroom of hundreds of companies there. A lot of them multinational companies, from like Wendy's to Deutsche Bank to Deloitte to Major League Baseball, just everywhere. And it's just saying, how have they been using Google Cloud's AI model within their company? So it's interesting. And then people have been asking the panelists, well, how do you plan your strategic direction for AI going forward? I still feel like companies are figuring out what they want to do, because one of the things they talked about at Wendy's was now you can order a burger with an emoji. Like, I think there are bigger applications of AI out there than that. Chatbots have been out there. That was a customer service chatbot we've seen a few times. But ultimately, I think companies are still figuring it out. So I think if there's like not really a big need to be in a huge panic mode right now. For a couple ways we're looking into AI is we're working with our Google account executive. Everybody's got one if you are a Google Cloud customer, and well, not everybody, but whatever. So you work with your account executive on what do you create within what you do that makes sense to use the Google Cloud large language model. That's the Gemini thing you probably see on the news here and there. And then for us, we've just been examining different things without being in a big rush. One of them is helping grade projects like that too, because that's been what's the best way to do that? What are the best projects to do that? What are some assistance for faculty on saying, hey, these are all these different courses that aren't related to my course. But then you don't see it, right? You don't see the data connections and saying that, hey, ESL has been using sending professional emails for 3 years, right? So these type of assistants have been really helpful. Maybe some career guidance for students. These are the early applications that we've been thinking about in terms of what to implement next. So we're going to definitely use some AI into what's next. It's just, I don't think there's a need to be in a huge panic mode about it. But I feel like that's what shows up in the media. Like even for those who use Canvas as your learning management system, I think they've taken a bit more cautioned approach towards AI as well. I don't see any new things in Canvas yet for AI, and I think that's okay. I think it's better to get it right than rush into something, at least in the educational aspects of it too. In terms of content, I've been talking to Google as well, because they have a bunch of training modules, how to package it in the same way that we just did with their docs, sheets, and slides modules, except the AI training. So, AI training is one thing that we'd like to add as future course materials for faculty. And then the next one is, what AI applications are we going to do that will help teachers and faculty and students, sorry.
Right. So from my experience, I did call at some point Canvas tech support, and they didn't. You're absolutely right. They don't really have any provisions yet, right? They don't really like consider AI as a thing. So let's just see what what happens as time goes by. I'm sure at some point they will have to address it, but there aren't any AI-oriented features in Canvas that I can tell, unless others have other experience. But like I said, it doesn't look like it's there. But going back to the issue of assessment, if you were to from your understanding, since there are those AI tools that are available, how can they be coupled with NexusEdge apps, and are there any specific expert features that we should be aware of? Are there perhaps rubric design commands that obviously could be utilized or could be developed with ChatGPT and other tools? Do you have
I mean, certainly. I mean, I've seen so many going to all these conferences. I feel like I've seen a lot of people try these different applications that's out there that says, okay, well, maybe we'll have a bot create curriculum. I don't want to do that. So I'm not a big fan of that kind of stuff too. But I have meetings with companies all the time about what their education companies, ed tech companies, on what their applications of AI are. So for example, I'm meeting with Turnitin's partnership team next week. I have a feeling that some folks out there are like, how does this impact academic dishonesty and things like that too? So I'm curious to learn what Turnitin has been doing for their AI thing. I'll let you know next week if you want to follow up on that. There's one aspect of it too. And in terms of like, just, as a tool, just helping students use it as a tool is important. I think this is one of those things you can't really go back from. Kind of like how there was a time in which I really will go back when calculators, people were kind of worried about that all the way to the actual internet, finding things online really easy to copy and paste that stuff. It's just really getting accustomed to more about how to use this as a tool. And I think that's fine because if you see, well, it can be done poorly, but as a tool, it could really help, provide a lot of guidance, help refine how you do things and do it quicker within the workplace. So there are definitely like productive workplace applications of AI. So I definitely think that it's learning how to use, AI within the context of your company appropriately. And I think that's going to be a necessary part going forward because there's a lot of tedium that can now be eliminated. I just saw this article this morning about investment banks are going to hire thousands of fewer analysts because a lot of the tedious work they did that would take 13 hours can now take 13 seconds. Granted, that's a shift in, okay, we're going to hire 1,000 less students, but at the same time, there's other ways, once they learn those types of skills, there's going to be ways they can contribute as well. There's this whole category called like prompt engineering now too, where, if you can know what types of questions to ask, the conversational bot, that you're going to be able to get answers in ways you couldn't get before and quickly too. So there are definitely ways they're teaching it, not just from an engineering standpoint, but also from a tool standpoint. I guess maybe the analogy from like 20 years ago was, what is the best way to write things into Google that would give you the answers, or not the answers, give you the links that are most relevant. So being able to ask the right questions, I think, is that next step for students. Instead of just, building everything out for them.
Yes, indeed. Let me see here. And Philip has a comment about the LTE integration. Philip, would you like to elaborate a little bit on this? Philip Ducker? Where's Philip?
Everyone.
There he is. Would you please?
Yeah, I actually, so I haven't done this myself. I have to plead ignorance, but I do know that I have some colleagues in computer science who have used ChatGPT in particular as LTE integration to kind of create these auto-graded modules in Canvas. Unfortunately, I can't provide any more details than that, only that I've seen them do it and saw that it worked, but I do know that it's somehow possible.
It is so fast. I'm glad you brought that up because it reminded me of a project I did with University of Colorado students last year. So we work with students all the time they like loop in industry to work on, projects that they can work on in the classroom. And that's right when all of this whole ChatGPT was like taking over the world, and they were computer science students. And so, I don't know if you guys have played the board game Settlers of Catan. I don't know to what degree people played that. I don't know. It seems to have lots of folks have played that. But what was interesting too is they barely even wrote like 3 lines of code, and it just auto-populated all these things to like create like half the game of Settlers of Catan. And they're like, I didn't type anything. How does it even know this is what we're getting at? So the level of anticipation for things that I would have thought would be a little bit more obscure is pretty extreme, I would say. So it doesn't surprise me at all that it's able to grade these things now too, if it's able to write these things. So it's getting pretty wild to what degree we're doing that too. So at some point, I'm sure that it's going to be doing more grading in areas that, we thought as instructors we could only do, but that's great because that's just gonna be another tool that allows us to assign more projects, right? So we can focus on creating and sharing the type of knowledge that we want to share with our students without having to go through the tedious part of like grading all these projects. Or what's been happening is that now they can feel more comfortable assigning these projects because they don't have to grade thousands of them. And so I think, there's a lot of benefits. I'm glad you brought that up because I think there's a lot of benefit in automating that grading. I see it coming up, especially within computer science, because it's already writing code for all of humanity, which is kind of fascinating for a lot of ways. But yeah, that's definitely probably one of the first industries where they're going to do automated grading for that.
As long as we don't devolve into the dystopia of students using ChatGPT to write their assignments and then professors using ChatGPT to grade everything. So the AIs are just talking to each other. But no, I agree. There's certainly a lot of potential, and instructors have a lot of potential to use this really effectively.
That's hilarious you mentioned that, because it seems like we are headed that way too, which is kind of weird. But I'm sure there'll be something that happens where hopefully, I believe in the spirit of humanity, but that's fascinating, right? Robots are writing code for students and faculty are using robots to grade. So, robots are grading robots, and who knows, maybe they'll, do this Terminator thing that I've been watching since I was a kid. Who knows? But right now, that is actually exactly what you mentioned, is exactly what has happened. But I don't know. I believe in the power of humanity to somehow make this more human in some way. It usually shakes itself out over time.
Bernie, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, Eddie. Thanks. So I teach philosophy, and I'm always kind of like the hard skills, soft skill stuff is kind of helpful in some ways, but I think it kind of overlooks some of the more, what I would say philosophy really develops some sort of hard skills, some analytic skills that are very unique in terms of taking human language and really trying to understand it in very precise detail to see what's implied and all of that. And I wonder what you thought about the way that NexusEdge could possibly be a companion to that. Like, how would if you had a son or a daughter and they're like, I really love philosophy, and you're like, oh, but there's so many limited opportunities for that in terms of profession. What would be a good combination?
I wouldn't say they're limited. So what's interesting is that this is 2005, so we're going to scroll back almost 20 years. And in my analyst class at UBS Investment Bank and sales and trading, very Wall Street heavy, you would think, maybe business majors, you had a lot of philosophy majors, right? So you're thinking that, so I'm glad you brought that up, philosophy, political science, marine biology majors. There's a lot of elements in both how you communicate, but how you think. There's very, very important logical elements within philosophy that are unique to philosophy. And I think that's why a lot of philosophy folks are going to be hired, at least within the Wall Street realm. I don't know if that's what you're looking for. When you're looking at the, philosophy as a subject, you're like, yeah, this is a total Wall Street career, but it is a career that I've seen firsthand. For sure, that is a career. So that is definitely possible. And I think those more humanistic things that are harder to replicate by a robot, they're going to be really important as we go forward too. So I think there's a ton of careers out there. That's why I've never been a big fan of, hey, this degree leads to this job. I've seen so much variance over time. I think, as long as you learn something, do something really well, particularly in the way you think, reason, and communicate, which I perceive as core to philosophy. I don't know, you tell me, you're an instructor on it, that I think has made them very unique candidates for the roles that I've seen.
Right. But in particular to the type of projects or industry partnerships that you facilitate, what would you sort of recommend as a sort of starting point where how I could integrate this into some of my courses or introduce some of my students to?
Yeah, I'm just browsing through this right now, the library right now, and things that would come up that I would think of. Some of them, they're always kind of a funny story. The Snapchat one is always interesting too, because part of that academy is actually, there's one that is on writing and basically more on art than anything else. You think about it too, is that a lot of this creativity and content, I think that could fit in more too, because the teams on Snap are really diverse. Like you see the people, and there's only like a quarter of those are engineering, but the other ones are those that draw and create 3D models. The other ones are create content and art, and how do we create this story? So maybe it's a project on gaming, because a lot of the Unity stuff, creating games, is telling a story. What makes a game fun is not your level of engineering, it's how do you tell your story? Right. Not just from the dialogue, but even just storyboarding things out. You can create movies on Unity as well, so it'll be a large group project for something there too. If it's just some really short module to start that is directly for a, career, something like year ups, creating your personal brand, that would be super important too, because that has nothing to do with what you would consider like a particularly technical skill, but your way you're represented in your personal brand. It's really, it's a way that I think personally that you could just put within a course in a single module and get started very quickly without having to create like a giant project that includes multiple disciplines and perhaps other faculty and departments that we can't all even find at the same time. But even adding a Google Docs 1, 2, 3 exam and say write this, like that is a way to get them doing their homework and something you want them to write, but at the same time learning the foundational tech platforms that they need. Because using Google Doc, part of it is how do you think about your organization of it. Yeah, like when do you use different bullet points? When do you use numeric numbers as bullet points? They really do matter. And how do you format different aspects of these two? These are tools that help tell that story. So, and I think that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, you're telling a story, whether you're working with Amazon or whatever, like seen this many, many times, is that, you could, right now, you could just sneak in like Google Docs level 2 into a homework assignment and still be relevant to your course and still learn the things that you want them to learn. They're just simultaneously learning a tool to do it. And maybe they share with you that link and then say, hey, this is what I wanted to create and this is why I wanted to do it. So I think Google Docs would be a good way to start, and maybe direct career skills from year up, creating your personal brand. That'd be a quick way to start. Those that come to mind, but yeah, I'm looking at others. I feel like there's complicated ways to get to it that'd be really cool, like building a game, but that's not a fast way to start, but that would be a fun way to do something long term, I think.
Thank you.
Wow, fantastic discussion. Thank you, Vernon. I'm just so happy to have you here to bring this philosophical perspective to our conversations. I'm just very glad that you're able to join us. Thank you so much for your insightful questions. Well, with that, we are kind of like running out of time here. Any last minute comments, questions, suggestions, last words? Thank you, Philip, for the Think Arguments website. Thank you so much. Eddie, with that, I just would like to thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate your sharing of what it is that you have to offer with the apps. It's just fascinating selection, and I'll make sure that I'll thank you for the email. I'll explore it on my end with my college. Thank you all for attending. We'll see you next week during our next Friday SLO talk. Until then, thank you so much. Bye-bye.